Our very first speaker for the evening. We are very, very excited to welcome Tammy Everts, all the way from Nelson, British Columbia. This year for our introductions, we decided to try something a little bit different. I asked all of our speakers if they could connect us with a best friend, a close colleague, or partner who could help us write something really personal to introduce them to all of us here today. So Tammy introduced us to her friend Susie, and here's what Susie had to say. Tammy is one of the smartest people I know. Even after 20 years of friendship, we have more to talk about than ever before. Tammy is not only a brilliant professional, but she and her husband will be celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary this year, and she's an amazing mom to her two sons, Sam and Will. She loves intricate handwork and bakes a mean chocolate chip cookie. She may look quite demure, but is definitely a wild woman at heart. So everyone, please welcome Tammy.
Oh, wow. So not only do I get to follow up Katherine Johnson, and now I'm kind of close to crying because that was a really nice intro. So I guess I'm really excited. I'm really nervous to be here. I do a lot of talking. I go to a lot of conferences, and I'm always a little bit nervous because I'm a human being. But I'm especially nervous because I don't usually talk about myself. I do a lot of user experience research, so I share data and charts, and I don't really have any data and charts about myself. So I thought maybe I would talk a little bit first about what I do, and I'll explain what this little bit of street art that I took a photo of a couple of years ago means to me and why I decided to share it tonight. So I do a lot of things, like all of us do, and usually when I introduce myself at a conference, I kind of stop right underneath the part where I wrote a book for O'Reilly, and I don't share all these other bits. But I thought that for tonight, we're really talking about what it means to be a woman in tech, and I wanted to share also that in addition to what I do, I do a lot of user experience research going back 20 years. So how many developers are in the room? Designers? So I'm that person you hate because then I study what you do and I tell you what you have to change. So I apologize retroactively and for any future things that I might say or do. So yeah, I speak at a lot of events. I'm a co-chair of Fluent Conference. I've written a book recently for O'Reilly. But those are just part of what I do. I'm also a wife. I'm a mom, and I have one of my young ones here. My youngest, Will, who is almost 9, and a friend, animal lover, hula hooper, and a bunch of other things. And yeah, Super Smash Bros. Enthusiast. Although my new favorite thing is VR alien smashing. So more on that later. If you told me 20 years ago what I would be doing today, I would have looked at you like you were crazy, because 20 years ago, what was the internet? And do you remember what you thought the internet was in 1997? So if you had told me that I would be researching how people use the internet and then blogging about it, I would have been like, well, those are a bunch of made-up words, obviously. So it's an interesting path that for me. And throughout it, my mantra has always been sort of like, just go with the flow. I don't know what new technology is going to be around the corner. I don't know what I'm going to be doing, frankly, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, probably because it hasn't been invented yet. But really, it's only been in the past 3 or 4 years that I would say that I've started to sort, as much as my brain is capable of thinking strategically about what I do and trying to actually sort of master my domain and kind of take more ownership about where I go with my job. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that path tonight. I didn't know that there was going to be the little movie, and I had this weeks ago. This is the very first slide that I put in my deck. When I was invited to speak here, I was immediately unbelievably flattered and honored. But it was also, I had just watched this movie, and so if you've just watched Hidden Figures, how many people have seen this movie so far? Okay, so I figured a lot of people. How many people have seen it more than once? There you go. It's great. If you haven't seen it yet, you should. But if you just watch this movie and then somebody says, yeah, we want you to talk about being a woman in tech, and it's like, yeah, this is like a hard act to follow, so no big deal, right? I really kind of gave me pause, and I was thinking, okay, I'm not like the first Black woman engineer at NASA, and I'm not the pioneer in space science, and I'm not the first Black manager and administrator at NASA. I'm not any of those things. But what I am, when I realized, and kind of where I decided I wanted to take this was, I think that for myself, and I don't want to extrapolate on all of your experiences, but for myself, my experience has been that I tend to downplay what I've done and my own personal first. So when I think about, the first that I'm actually proud of, and it's very uncomfortable for me even be talking about this in a public forum because it feels like bragging. So I'm just really proud. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from high school. The first to go to university, the first to do graduate studies at university, the first person to work in tech, all of these firsts. And I'm glad that I've had these firsts. They make me feel special. I don't want to pretend that I feel any more special than anyone else. I think when I think about women in tech, in ways that, if we all think about what we've done, we've all accomplished firsts in our careers. Part of being in tech is a series of firsts. If you're doing anything interesting or innovative, you might be the very first person doing it, or you're part of a team that's doing it for the first time. So, I guess what I would love for you to take away from this talk is just really thinking about your own firsts and celebrating those. Doing things for the first time is very, very uncomfortable and makes you feel scared and anxious and all of those things. And I don't think that's ever going to go away, and I don't know that I necessarily want it to. I think fear and anxiety are good things. They can make us work harder to prove ourselves to ourselves and to other people. And so what I've had to learn over the past 20 years is just how to actually be as comfortable as I can be in this uncomfortable space. In a way, this is the title of the talk that I almost gave it, which is how to unlearn the art of invisibility. Because I think that if you've been doing tech for a long time as a woman, it's really easy to let yourself become invisible. And I don't mean invisible in the sense necessarily of not, owning your achievements or anything like that, but sort of pretending to be one of the guys. Just wanting to fit in, wanting to not necessarily put yourself forward as much as you should. I want to share something else. I don't know if you can read this. So I'm part First Nations, and this kind of blew my mind. I knew all this, but I read this fact recently, and just sort of blew me away all over again. That before 1951, if you were a status Indian in Canada, you had no rights. You couldn't have property. The laws of Canada did not apply to you. If you wanted to own property and have the laws of Canada apply to you, you had to renounce your First Nations citizenship. And so it was a really hard choice to make. This is something that my great-grandmother probably, that was why she passed away before I was born, so I don't know why she chose to do this. And I would say that even though I didn't grow up with like a strong First Nations tradition, partly because of this, I think that there's almost like a passed down, unspoken tradition, which is learning to pass, learning to get by. If you can just sort of pretend to be very white, very mainstream, very middle class, you should do all of those things, and you should renounce all those other things that aren't that. And I think that tech, in a lot of ways, well-meaning people sort of support this. This is about a year ago, there was a really interesting study that basically said women were considered to write better code than men as long as they didn't reveal their gender, as long as they were anonymous or they used their initials. So that was just 1 year ago. And that really kind of sat with me for a while. And it's interesting, it's one of those bits of research that you can draw two conclusions from. You can say, well, the hell with that. I'm gonna push harder and improve myself. Or you can say, you know what, I need to pass. I have a family to support, I have a career to further. For whatever reason you might have that's very fundamental and practical to your life, you could choose the path of anonymity, and that's not necessarily, it's a choice that I think everyone should be very sympathetic to. How many people, this was kind of a 5-day wonder on the internet a couple of months ago. Does anyone recall this? Basically a Wall Street Journal blogger very well intentionally actually said, I think if you actually want to further your career, you should just use your initials if you're a woman. Just establish your name, your credibility, because if you say that, you know, if you have an obviously female name, then, you know, you're going to have to work that much harder. And he thought this was good advice. He really, and he, to his credit, a few days later, when the blowback to this was massive, as you know, it can only be in the days of Twitter, he apologized and he retracted this, and it was a really great kind of teaching moment, obviously for him, but for everybody else who followed this, where the first wave of reactions to him posting this were, yeah, I can see that. That kind of makes sense. I get it intuitively. And it took a while for this kind of groundswell of blowback to make a difference. I'm sure most people in this room are pretty familiar with Susan Fowler at this point. For those who aren't, really quickly, she worked at Uber for a little over a year, and when she had had enough of the many things that were wrong with how the organization treated women on the engineering side, she decided to look elsewhere, immediately got another offer, and then she wrote a very honest, very detailed post that I have so much respect for people who are able to do this, about what exactly went wrong, and kind of following it's a great post. Anyways, I won't try to pillage it here. So the reason why I bring Susan Fowler up is, sorry, can you still hear me? Is my mic working? Okay, good. Is she chose not to be invisible. She used her full name. She shared what happened to her, and I just have so much admiration, because it's great that this has worked out. That she's gotten this public support. People have respected that she's a credible source. I'm sure that all kinds of, you know what, I have a 9-year-old here, so I've got to say, you know what, hit the fan. After she did that behind the scenes, and in many ways, her life was probably made miserable by anonymous people and that sort of thing. So knowing that she was probably going to be facing that, given, you know, this situation and the likelihood that it would go viral, I just think it's amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about how I ended up here, because it's certainly not where I thought I would end up 20 odd years ago. So what is here for me? When I think here, I created these slides when I was working, and where I work is like here, just sort of in the mountains, in this. I call it my shed quarters. It's very small. It's like 10 by 10 little space, and it's great. If you're an introvert, I highly recommend a 10 by 10 wooden box in the middle of the mountains. Like, people can't even find me on a map. It's great. So how I got there is, well, it's kind of one of these. I love this quote. I can't remember who said it, but it stuck with me the first time I heard it. Narratives misrepresent complex systems, because I'm a logical person, so I like to think that my life has followed some logical linear progression, where, given the choice between A, B, C, I always made a very rational, data-driven choice. In fact, you know, your choices are driven by your mood. If you just came out of a long bout of illness, if you had just had a bad relationship, if you're sick of the weather where you're from, you know, all these little emotional things can affect your choices. So take everything that I've said with a grain of salt. If it sounds really logical, like I was like, you know, oh, that chick's got it going on. She just knew what was going on out the gate. I definitely don't want you to think that. This is where I'm from. It's also in the middle of nowhere, but it's the middle of nowhere, Ontario, where I grew up with my family's. We had a very small dairy farm. This is the view from the road, according to Google Street View right now. And this is a view from the other direction, in case you're wondering if there's anything really amazing behind me. So that's where I'm from. Not a lot of computers in the 80s, 70s and 80s in middle of nowhere farming country, Ontario. My first exposure to a computer was when I was about 13 years old, and I was kind of plucked out of my class to take a computer science course, and I was exposed to the wonders of BASIC. And does anyone here even do BASIC anymore? Was that anybody's first? It was amazing. I was like, I'm doing stuff, and it's making other stuff happen that looks nothing like the thing I did. And it was really cool. Coding, like you know, that first moment. And the reason why it really resonates for me, that first moment, was because that was literally it for me till let me see. I'm really bad at doing math in my head when I'm standing on a stage. Let's call it 20 years later. It was a lot of years later. And the reason for that was because, yeah, my little high school had, you could take a computer science class. The 80s computer science classes in Ontario high schools, this was kind of the scene. Not really my jam. I was just trying to look normal and fit in, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm not a pioneer. I didn't have this to emulate at all, though it would have been wonderful if I had. So I studied English literature, of course, and that seemed like I was going to read anyways, so I could go and get a degree while I was doing this thing I was planning to do all along. Seemed like a really great cheat. People kept asking me if I was going to be a teacher, and I would like just drop to the ground, but no. So I had no idea what I was going to do. And I kind of just bummed along for a little while and got a job working in print publishing for a little bit as an editor. Was heinously in debt, so if you like graduate with your undergrad degree and into a recession and you're heinously in debt, don't work in print because it's not a way to get out of debt. So I did what any debt-ridden student would do in that situation. I went back to school and accumulated more debt. And but I did my master's in publishing, and while I was there, would have been 1996, 97, in Vancouver, and that was just when the internet was like, it was still like, you know, it was like the equivalent of VR is now. People were like, what, really, internet? And my program was very traditional. It was like you could do print in, you know, you could do magazines, you could do books, you could do newspapers, and that was the extent of it. And I went to my thesis advisor and said, I really want to do something about online publishing. And he thought it was the worst idea ever. Like, no, not the internet. That's a terrible idea. Print's the way to go. And I'm so glad I didn't listen to him, I have to say, because I can't imagine anything worse than working in print right now, to be honest. No offense to those of you who are. I just think it's a beleaguered profession, and I'm not up for being beleaguered in that particular way. So I fortunately, you know, took the red pill or the blue pill or whatever the right one was, and studied online publishing, and was fortunate enough to get a really great job with a little startup right out of that program. And it was funny because, again, this was 97, 98, and at the time, the title that to backfill what I did, I was a content strategist and information architect, and I also did like our usability testing. At the time, we didn't have any of those words. I was just the content person, so I just did things with content, and eventually, you know, kind of built up a discipline around that, including, this is, how many people recognize this? How many people have used one of these? Okay, it's a Power Mac something or other. It was awesome at the time. I was like the rock star in the office because I had the best computer. But we did usability tests on this, and so just creating usability tests, bringing sometimes 10 or 20 people into the lab at a time, and just watching how they use the internet, which is really an interesting thing to do. I don't know if you ever have an opportunity to do that, it's very fascinating. So kind of fast forward, I did a lot of webby things, became a partner in this agency, built up our usability test practice, and then took some time out to have my two boys. And then when I was kind of ready to think, okay, well, what do I want to do next? I want to do something kind of different. I'm not sure what that is. I got on LinkedIn because I didn't have a LinkedIn profile, and then the next day, somebody that I knew contacted me and said, I work for this web performance company, and we really need somebody to write about performance in a user-focused way. And I was like, web performance? What's that? Because I had no idea. And so he told me, and I came in and interviewed, and that's what I did. And really what I did is I worked behind the scenes. I was a researcher, I did a lot of writing, but my name wasn't attached to any of the work that I did. I supported the president of the company and other senior folks who did a lot of going to conferences, presenting research, writing things, you know, for articles, contributed articles, and blog posts and things like that. But it was very much a behind-the-scenes job, and I was frankly pretty comfortable with that. You know, I was busy at home with, you know, having two young kids, and it wasn't until that small company was acquired by a much bigger company that the president of the company that I had been working for basically said, like, look, I'm gonna stick this out for like the transition, like 3 to 6 months, and then when I leave, I want you to take over all the stuff that I've been doing. And I was like, what? I don't want to do that. And he said, no, I think you should do it. I think you'd be really good at it. And I was like, okay, well, it's my job, I guess. I'll just continue doing this. And fortunately, it sort of all played out. I kind of went from being behind the scenes to presenting at conferences, and then larger conferences and larger conferences, and writing articles, appearing in different publications like Mashable or MIT Tech Review, publications like that. And it was really uncomfortable. It's hard to go from being the behind the scenes person to being the person on the stage. And for a lot of the reasons that I sort of alluded to already, just not wanting to deal with weird people, with people, with unpleasant people, with people knowing who I was but not knowing who they were in return. And all this has really been over the course of the past 5 years, and I love it. Like I love my job more than I've ever loved my career at any previous point in my life. But it's not something that I would have really chosen for myself. Now that I'm on it, I feel like this is actually the right place for me. And I'm sort of excited to I have a lot of ideas about what I want to do next. I'm not going to go into those right now. But what I want to share now are this. Again, I'm a parent, so I love giving advice. Unsolicited. I'm used to people not taking it, so that's okay. You can ignore me if you want to. But I realized when I was trying to think, like, okay, what life advice would I give people? Like, what's my wisdom? I realized a lot of it's really contradictory. So I'm going to kind of explain what it is. So there's only 6 precepts. I'm not going to. There's a lot more, but you can contact me later if you want the rest. So. Imposter syndrome, it's kind of the elephant in the room in any conversation that has to do with women in tech, right? So I don't know if anybody recognizes this. This is Jane Austen, one of my favorite writers. My biggest wish in life, one of my biggest wishes is that somebody finds like an archive of Jane Austen unpublished novels so that I don't have to keep rereading the same 6 over and over and over again. So imposter syndrome, we all know what it is. Probably most of us have suffered from it. It's not unique to women. Men experience it too, but I think for women, it can be more crippling, at least it was for me. And what I realized recently is actually, I'm kind of done with imposter syndrome, and I'm kind of relabeling it outsider syndrome. And when I say outsider syndrome, it's really just that ability to see the value in not being an insider. It's okay. So the reason why I use Jane Austen here, Jane Austen was the ultimate outsider. She was writing novels at a time when women didn't write novels. She wrote them anonymously at first because that was the way women published. But then eventually her work became, in high demand. And the reason why her novels became so successful was because she took her greatest weakness and turned it into her greatest strength, which is she was an outsider. But she was also an insider in her own way, in that she had insight into the internal monologues of women. What women talk about when they're amongst themselves. If you read a lot of Jane Austen, all her main characters are in every scene. So she's a main character. That main character is always there, and frequently mostly interacting with other women. And at that time, that was radical, that was revolutionary, and it was something only a woman could do. Men had tried to write novels from female perspectives, and we've all read, Madame Bovary, and we know how well that turns out. And so she took this thing and made it an asset, and became a wildly successful writer by any standard because of it. And so for me, I realized that. I might be an outsider, and I've always felt a little bit like an outsider, as maybe many of us do. I was kind of the weird kid in my family, the weird kid in my school. But now I kind of just enjoy it. I wouldn't want to be any other way. And the outsider thing is great if you want to study objectively how people use the internet. It's great not to have drunk the Kool-Aid about how people use the internet. And if you want to present research in interesting, new, possibly weird ways to a very technical audience, it's great not to be working in the Bay Area. So you can have that outsider perspective, and I keep that with me all the time. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So this one, believe in people and ask for what you need. And I made a conscious choice. These used to have, instead of and, they said but then I read somewhere that saying but sounds negative, so I changed the word but to and everywhere. So we'll see how this actually works out. So believe in people. I'm really lucky in that I've had great bosses. I've worked for really good companies for the most part. And maybe that makes me unique, I'm not sure. But what I've learned is that, kind of trusting that people are going to be inherently decent it's a good way to go for the most part until you're proven otherwise, I guess. But it's a nice way to move through the world. But recognizing that even those really nice, inherently decent people don't know what you need, what your unique needs are. And it took me about 15 years to learn to ask for what I needed, because I realized that the things that I really wanted that were going to help me with just my life in general and how I balance my life and my work were things that weren't going to be given to me because nobody's a mind reader. So some examples of that are money. There should be courses. Like, honestly, somebody should teach a course to people in general about how to talk about money, but women specifically, about how to negotiate salaries, how to talk about what you need and why you need it, and how to negotiate. Learning how to negotiate was one of the best, most empowering things I've ever done. It was really helpful. Just learning not to negotiate against myself. Learning to just be quiet and let the other person kind of just talk through their position and not feel that I had to hurriedly apologize or rationalize what I wanted. To actually just state my arguments, like, well, this is how much I want to make because this is how much it costs me to actually have the lifestyle that I want to have with my family. It's not, it's nothing egregious or anything like that. To do research and actually look at, fortunately now there are online tools like Glass Ceiling that let you actually do salary comparisons. But I really think, I didn't start getting paid what I realized I should have been earning until I started asking for it. And it's that simple. The best boss in the world is still running a company. They're still trying to keep their costs down. And if they think they can pay you less, they will. And that's just reality. And I say that without emotion or animosity. It's just the way it is. Another thing is just like time. One of the hardest things I did when I was going back to work after having kids was say, I don't want to work a 5-day week. I want to work a 4-day week. And my husband was doing the same negotiation. And it's also challenging for men in a very different way to tell their employers that they don't want to be a 5-day a week, job lifer. But this is about me, not about him, so he can do his own talk. I was, fortunately, the negotiating for my time coincided with when I was negotiating for salary. So I said, well, this is what I would like to be earning per hour. And they said, well, that's kind of high for us because we're a startup and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, that's fine because I only want to work 4 days a week. So you only have to pay me for 32 of those hours, right? And they did the math. They were like, yeah, okay. And, and I made it really clear that, I'm very present when I work. I show up, I get the job done. And they could always fire me if they felt that I wasn't. And so that was how that went, and it worked out really well. I like this quote. I can't read it because it'll choke me up again, but it's something, to be optimistic about people when we know that there are awful 4chan people out there, that there are people who are willing to, sorry, now I'm going to get myself in trouble. There are rotten people out there for sure, but most people aren't. And I think, if you want to actually be really present with what you do and engage with the tech world and the world in general, you really do have to kind of try to live with your heart open, wide open, and I guess wait to see what happens. This is a big one for me, and we were talking about it last night when a few of us went out for dinner, is just this idea of there are people who will try to make things like any kind of equal opportunity or diversity measure look like tokenism. And I've learned to recognize the difference between a measure that's just designed to say, well, you know what, all other things being equal, we would like to have more diversity, so we're going to choose this person over that person for that reason, versus tokenism, which is we just want to randomly grab a woman to be on a panel. And so the example from my own experience, and there are many, but I was invited to speak on a panel, I won't say for which event, where it was clear that I was not the right person for that panel. I did not have the deep domain expertise that panel would have required. And I got back to them and said, well, you know, I don't think I'm the right fit, but there's this other person in my company who I think would be a great fit, and I can give you his name. And they said, yeah, we're already pretty male and pale. Their words, not mine. So we would, you know, we really would rather it be you. And it was, you know, it's nice. It's sort of, but at the same time, like, no, I don't want to be a token anything on a panel. It doesn't make me feel good. I feel like it does a disservice to all the women who are domain experts who could have occupied that seat. So I reject that firmly. And I think most of us, you know, probably are pretty savvy. You can tell the difference between the two. But what really having that distinction has made me realize is, like, I'm not ever going to be embarrassed about taking the other opportunities where it's like check a box on a proposal if you are a woman or a person who represents another diverse group. Check that box. You know, most conferences and things like that, really, they want diversity. O'Reilly is really great for that, for example, a lot of other event organizers. And they are very judicious about who they choose. They don't just let anybody in just because they happen to check the box, but it's a helpful box to check. This is a big one for me. So the best advice I probably got when I was transitioning from being a behind-the-scenes person to a stage person was being told, you know, those guys don't know what they're talking about either. Everybody's just making it up as they go along. And I don't know if that's exactly true, but it was a little bit like pretend everybody in the audience is wearing underpants so you feel better while you're doing what you do. Just even believing that everybody out there is sort of like, we're all figuring it out as we go along. You know, and if you're, as I said earlier, if you're doing anything, if you're pioneering a new technology or how technology is used, you're a pioneer. There's always going to be that feeling that, you know, you're sort of making it up, because you are. You're making up how something is done. And faking it is just about attitude, just about the fact that if you approach what you're doing with integrity, you know, that you're going to just tell the truth and be honest about what it is you know, what it is you don't know, that you can plow through any feelings of just, you know, I'm going to say what I say and then I'm going to get trolled afterwards. When I say be true to yourself, what I mean by that is probably the most miserable I've ever been in my career was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I went from being a content person to, I was sort of being steered down a path of being more developer-y and being more of an architect. And I hated it. I was miserable. I'm not a person who cries a lot. It's a personal failing. I'm not bragging. But I was crying like almost every Friday night. I would just get home and I would just be like, oh, I can't believe I have to go back on Monday and keep doing this. It felt so wrong. And it was sort of that analogy of the frog being boiled slowly. It took me a while to realize that it was just what I was doing was not right for me. It was the wrong kind of faking it. And so, you know, in hindsight now, I feel like I know my gut better about, you know, future other opportunities that have been offered to me where I can just tell, like, I think I can do that. I might not know what I'm going to be doing, but it's something that I feel like I can learn as I go versus something that just feels fundamentally wrong. Looking for inspiration and prioritizing motivation. What do I mean by that? Okay, so these are women who inspire me. I'm not going to be any of these women. I'm not going to go live with mountain gorillas, although there was a time when, man, that was my dream. I'm not going to be an aviation pioneer because I don't think anybody does that anymore. And I'm not going to be a leading expert in animal behavior and pioneer in like the study of the neuroscience of autism. But these are all women who inspire me. I think what they do is amazing, and what they've done is amazing. They're incredibly brave, pushing beyond boundaries that didn't even exist at the time. They just crashed through them. So I find them inspiring. But really, to me, oh, do you want I go back? There you go. The inspiration. So motivation. Motivation. So what gets you out of bed in the morning? So inspiration is great to be inspired. Motivation is just like, what am I doing that's kind of meaningful in my work? And I'm not Gavin Belson. I'm not making the world a better place through minimal message-oriented transport layers. Although what I do is sort of, it's a kissing cousin of that. So but I bring this up to say, I'm sort of making a joke, but I'm not. What you do can be this arcane, incredibly niche area of technology. But once when I was questioning, like, what is the actual importance of what I do, my 11-year-old said, well, because these kids have always known the internet, it's like, you're kind of like a plumber or like somebody who manages infrastructure. You're keeping it going. It's really important to keep the internet going because everybody uses it. And I was like, that made me feel really good, thanks. So I think about that. So you just think about what you do as part of keeping this whole incredibly vast, complex mechanism going, and it's a really good feeling. And the last one, I should explain the picture. So I worked for a tech company. This is on the washroom door, and I love it. I never took my laptop in the bathroom. I don't do that. But just as a sort of a little reminder, we all use this device and that device, and it's just very humbling to think we're all human at the end of the day. But just being humble, the people that I admire most in tech, and it's so funny because the people who make the headlines in tech, sometimes the blowhards, the loudmouths, all those people that I find personally deeply repellent, the people I admire most who are incredibly successful and well-known in the sphere that I work in are so humble, and they're so amazing. They're so aware of what they don't know and how much there is still to learn and what they do know. And it's great. It's just great to be with people and work with people who are so honest about themselves and come to what they do with not a lot of ego, but still just a sense of self about everything they do. And I'm just really inspired by that. And that's kind of what I try to take out with me into my work. So that's it. Thank you very much. If you do want to reach me offline, you can find me on Twitter at Tam Everts. And I should say that I'm speaking at the Web Performance Meetup group at the Shopify space on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. If anyone's around and wants to come to that, I'll be talking about user experience. Thanks.